What would you do if the maid you trusted in your home became the very woman who destroyed your marriage? Broken heart Susan thought she was hiring help, but she unknowingly welcomed a serpent into her house. This story will break your heart, but the lesson could save your own family. Stay with me till the end, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional life stories with powerful lessons. Susan sat by the window, watching her two children play in the living room. Their laughter bounced off the walls, filling the space with warmth. But Susan felt a heaviness in her chest. Life was so busy. She cooked, cleaned, worked on her tailoring business, and cared for the children all alone. There were moments when exhaustion threatened to pull her under, yet she smiled and carried on. David was on the couch, reading his newspaper. He looked calm, but Susan knew how much he had on his mind. Bills, work deadlines, and now the children's school projects weighed heavily on him too. She wanted to speak with him, to share the weight that pressed on her heart. "Honey," Susan began softly, choosing her words carefully, "I think we need a maid. I'm tired. I can't manage everything on my own." David looked up, frowning. "A maid? Are you sure? I don't want strangers in our home." Susan nodded firmly. "I'm sure. We need someone to help with the house and the children. Just a little help will make life easier." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "If you really think it's best, okay. But I don't like the idea of strangers in our home." Susan smiled, relief washing over her. "I'll choose carefully. Don't worry." A few days later, Grace arrived. She was young, polite, and smiled brightly. Susan felt her heart lift slightly. The children ran to greet her, and she laughed as she played with them. Grace immediately started helping with meals, chores, and even the children's homework. Susan watched with a mixture of relief and joy. For the first time in weeks, she could rest a little. Grace was perfect, or so it seemed. She followed every instruction carefully, served meals with a polite smile, and played games with the children. The house felt lighter, brighter, and Susan couldn't help but think she had made the right choice. But Grace had a secret. Susan didn't know this, but Grace had visited a local herbalist before coming to the house. She had received charms and advice meant to influence David's heart and mind. She had planned every step carefully, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Even now, subtle signs flickered in the corners of Susan's awareness. Grace's eyes lingered on David a moment too long. She smiled at him in ways that seemed special. Susan didn't notice, her mind was full of work, children, and daily chores. One evening, as Susan folded laundry in the hallway, she heard laughter from the living room. Curious, she peeked around the corner. Grace was showing David how to carry a tray of cups without spilling them. He laughed, watched her too long, and smiled at a joke she made quietly. Susan shook her head. "I must be imagining things," she whispered to herself. That night, after the children were asleep, Susan sat quietly in the living room. The moonlight streamed in through the window as she folded her hands and prayed. "Lord," she whispered, "please protect my family. Guard my husband, my children, and our home. Help me see the truth if danger comes." Grace lay in her room that night, smiling quietly to herself. Her plan had already begun. David was noticing her more and more, slowly becoming drawn to her without realizing it. Susan, trusting and unaware, had unknowingly invited a serpent into her home. Grace had been in the house for a week, and everything seemed perfect on the surface. She smiled, helped with meals, played with the children, and followed every instruction Susan gave her. Susan felt a wave of relief. The house, which had been chaotic, suddenly felt peaceful. But behind her polite smile, Grace had a secret plan. She had visited a herbalist before coming to the house. The charms and instructions she had received were designed to make David like her, so much that he would not notice anyone else. Grace wanted his heart, and she would do anything to get it. David began noticing her in ways he never had before. He laughed more at her jokes, remembered tiny details she mentioned days ago, and sometimes found himself staring without realizing it. The warmth of her attention made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt for months. Susan, busy with her daily chores and children, didn't notice the subtle changes. She was grateful for the help, happy that someone could share the weight of household responsibilities. She didn't suspect anything. One afternoon, Susan peeked from the hallway while folding laundry. She saw Grace and David standing close in the kitchen. Grace was showing him how to hold a tray without spilling the cups. David laughed at her quietly whispered joke and watched her intently. Susan's stomach tightened, but she told herself, "I'm just imagining things." Grace's manipulations were small but effective. She brushed against David's arm by accident, complimented him softly, and lingered near him when she didn't have to. Each small gesture created a tiny bond that David couldn't explain. He began thinking of her more often, even when he wasn't with her. That evening, Susan served dinner while keeping a close eye on her husband. She noticed him glancing at Grace a few times, smiling at things she hadn't said. Her chest felt heavy, but she tried to push the worry aside. The children noticed the tension too. "Mommy, why is Daddy smiling at Grace more than you?" the little boy asked innocently. Susan hugged them close, holding back tears. "It's nothing, my loves. Everything is fine," she said, though her heart ached. At night, Susan knelt by the side of her bed, whispering her prayers in the quiet. "Lord, please protect my family. Guard my husband and children. Show me if there is danger in our home," she prayed. Her hands trembled as she felt a strange heaviness in her chest. Meanwhile, Grace lay in her room, smiling softly. Her plan was unfolding exactly as she wanted. David was slowly being drawn to her. She had started planting little seeds of desire in his heart without him realizing it. Every small compliment, every accidental touch, and every lingering look worked together like threads in a web. David's feelings for Susan had not vanished completely, but they were fading. He found himself thinking of Grace even when he was with his family. He tried to fight the feelings, but they grew stronger. A part of him felt guilty, but he could not resist the strange pull he felt whenever Grace was near. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now carried a quiet tension. Susan's heart felt heavy every time she watched David glance at Grace. Yet, she held on to hope. She prayed, trusting that God would protect her family and guide them through the storm. Grace, on the other hand, moved through the house like a shadow. To Susan, she was a helpful and polite maid. To David, she was slowly becoming a forbidden temptation. The stage was set for conflict, heartbreak, and lessons that would test every member of the family. Weeks passed, and Susan began noticing changes she could no longer ignore. David, once warm and attentive, seemed distant. He laughed less at her jokes, spent more time talking quietly with Grace, and sometimes forgot small things she asked him to do. The children noticed too. "Mommy, Daddy doesn't hug us like before," the little girl said one evening, tugging at Susan's sleeve. The boy added, "Why does he smile at Grace more than Mommy?" Susan's chest tightened. She tried to stay calm. "Don't worry, my loves," she said softly. "Daddy is tired, that's all. Everything will be fine." But deep down, her heart ached. She had a feeling something was wrong, something she couldn't yet see. David was struggling too. He felt guilty for noticing Grace more, for laughing at her jokes, for feeling warmth in her presence. Yet, he couldn't stop. Every glance, every accidental touch, every soft word from Grace tugged at his heart. He felt confused, ashamed, but powerless. Grace's manipulation was subtle, perfect, almost invisible. She lingered near him when she didn't have to, brushed his arm, whispered compliments. Each small act worked to pull him away from Susan. Slowly, day by day, David was drifting. Susan tried everything she could think of to keep the home peaceful. She cooked extra meals, played games with the children, and tried to talk to David about small things. But his mind seemed elsewhere. She noticed him checking his phone when Grace sent a message, or smiling at her when she wasn't paying attention. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Susan watched David's face. He laughed easily at Grace's story, but his smile didn't reach her eyes. Her heart sank. The children looked puzzled, and Susan felt a deep ache. She kept her voice steady and served the food, but inside, she was praying silently. Lord, she whispered in her mind, please, protect my family. Don't let this woman take my husband or harm my children. Show me the truth and give me strength. David felt the heaviness of the moment. He didn't want to hurt Susan or the children, but the pull toward Grace was growing stronger each day. Every small act of kindness from Grace made his heart race. He felt trapped by feelings he didn't understand, ashamed for thinking them, but powerless to resist. Grace, aware of every shift, moved carefully. She smiled sweetly at David, brushed against him when no one was watching, and whispered tiny compliments meant only for his ears. Susan didn't see the danger. The children, innocent and trusting, began feeling tension in the air. Their home, once full of laughter, now carried an invisible shadow. Susan decided to watch more closely. She noted every glance, every change in David's behavior. Every time she felt uneasy, she prayed. She prayed for protection, for clarity, for the strength to fight the unseen enemy in her home. David's thoughts grew more conflicted. He loved Susan and his children. He had promised to protect them. But he couldn't explain the strange attraction to Grace. Each day, he felt a growing distance between himself and Susan, a growing closeness to Grace, and an overwhelming sense of guilt. The children, sensing the tension, clung to Susan. They asked small questions, seeking comfort. "Mommy, why is Daddy not like before?" the boy asked. Susan held them close, whispering promises that God would keep them safe. Meanwhile, Grace's plan moved forward quietly. Every small interaction, every lingering glance, every whispered word was a thread pulling David further into her trap. Susan, trusting and unaware, had no idea that her family's peace was at risk. Days turned into weeks, and the pull between David and Grace grew stronger. Every small gesture she made seemed to ignite something in him that he could not explain. He tried to fight it, tried to focus on Susan and the children, but the feelings grew stronger every day. One afternoon, Susan was busy preparing lunch. She heard soft laughter from the living room and peeked around the corner. David and Grace were talking quietly. Grace was leaning slightly closer than necessary, her hand brushing his accidentally, or so it seemed. David laughed, more than he had in weeks, and for a moment, Susan felt her chest tighten. She took a deep breath and tried to focus on her cooking. Maybe it's nothing, she told herself, though worry clawed at her heart. She knew something was changing, and she didn't like it. David, meanwhile, felt confused. He loved Susan and his children. He had promised himself he would be faithful. Yet, every glance at Grace made him feel a warmth he couldn't deny. When she laughed at his small jokes, he felt an inexplicable joy. When she complimented him quietly, his chest tightened. He felt trapped between love and temptation, shame and desire. The children noticed the tension too. The little girl tugged at Susan's sleeve. "Mommy, why does Daddy look at Grace like that?" she asked softly. The boy added, "Mommy, I miss the old Daddy. He doesn't play with us anymore." Susan knelt down and hugged them tightly. God is with us, my loves. He will protect our family. Everything will be okay, she whispered. Yet, inside, fear gnawed at her. Her home no longer felt safe. Her husband, once warm and loving, seemed to be slipping away, drawn toward Grace's subtle manipulations. Grace continued her silent walk. She lingered near David, touched his arm by accident, and complimented him in ways that made him feel special. She laughed softly at things only he would notice, creating a bond invisible to anyone else. Each tiny action pulled David further away from Susan. That evening, during dinner, Susan tried to engage David in conversation, asking about his day. He responded with short answers, distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. Susan felt her heart ache, but she remained calm for the sake of the children. After dinner, Susan went to the quiet of her bedroom and prayed fervently. Lord, please protect my family. Guard my husband and children. Do not let this woman destroy our home. Give me strength and wisdom to fight this evil, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. David, lying awake in his room, felt a strange unrest. He could not understand the pull toward Grace. He loved Susan, but the warmth he felt around Grace was undeniable. His chest hurt with guilt and confusion. He tried to pray, but his heart felt heavy, clouded by feelings he didn't understand. The tension in the house grew. Laughter and peace were fading. The children clung to Susan, sensing the invisible storm. Meals, chores, and bedtime routines became silent and tense. Susan tried to maintain normalcy, but her heart was constantly alert. One evening, David found himself alone with Grace in the living room. She smiled at him, her eyes glinting with purpose. He felt a rush of emotion he couldn't control. She leaned closer, speaking softly. You're so kind, David. You're always so thoughtful, she whispered. David's heart raced. He wanted to pull back, to remember Susan and the promises he had made. But he could not resist the warmth of her attention. He felt guilt, shame, and desire all at once. Susan, sensing something was wrong, knelt by the side of her bed later that night. She prayed harder than ever. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out for her family. Lord, I cannot fight this alone. Protect my husband, protect my children. Show David the truth before it's too late, she begged. Grace, confident and quiet, continued her manipulations, unaware that Susan's prayers were already building a spiritual shield around the family. The tension had reached a peak, the forbidden flame growing stronger, but the first cracks in Grace's spell were beginning to appear. Susan could no longer ignore the truth. The tension in her home had grown too heavy. David was distant, distracted, and drawn to Grace in ways she could not ignore. The children looked confused and sad, their laughter fading. Susan's heart ached every time she saw it. One morning, she decided to speak to someone she trusted, her pastor. Clutching her bag, she walked to the church, her heart pounding. She felt a mixture of fear and hope. Maybe the pastor could guide her, show her what to do. When she arrived, she poured out her heart. Pastor, she said, tears rolling down her cheeks, I feel my husband slipping away. Something is wrong in our home. Grace, she's too close to him. I don't know what to do. The pastor took her hands gently. Susan, this is not ordinary. Some forces work in ways we cannot see. You must fight with prayer and fasting. God can restore your home if you remain faithful and strong. Stand firm. Don't give up. Susan nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. She left the church with a determined heart. She would fight. She would not let her family be destroyed. That night, she knelt beside her bed and began praying in earnest. She wept as she prayed for her husband, for the children, and for protection over their home. She prayed for God to expose the truth, to break any evil spell, and to restore love and trust. The next morning, she began her fast. For 7 days, she ate sparingly, focusing on prayer, reading scriptures, and crying out to God. Each day, she felt a small spark of strength returning. Though the tension in her home remained, Susan felt hope growing inside her. Meanwhile, David began noticing strange feelings. His mind felt heavy, confused. Dreams of Grace smiling strangely haunted him at night. He started realizing that something was not right, something invisible had been influencing his thoughts and feelings. Susan continued her spiritual battle. She prayed aloud during quiet moments, weeping as she asked God to open David's eyes. She reminded herself that faith could break every chain, that prayer could pierce the darkness. During the day, she watched David closely. Every glance, every smile, every hesitation she recorded silently in her heart, offering it to God in prayer. The children sensed her determination and clung to her, feeling hope in their mother's faith. Grace, unaware that Susan's prayers were already building a spiritual shield around the family, continued her subtle manipulations. She smiled at David, brushed against him by accident, and whispered compliments designed to ensnare him further. But Susan's unwavering faith began to create cracks in Grace's spell. One evening, David sat alone in the living room, his thoughts heavy and confused. He remembered Susan's love, her care, and the warmth of his children's laughter. He realized how far he had drifted. For the first time, he felt guilt so deep it hurt. He wondered how he could have been so blind. Susan, kneeling in her bedroom, felt a small sense of peace. She knew that God had heard her prayers. She whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for protecting my family. Open David's eyes. Save our home." The tension in the house grew, but now it carried a new energy. There was hope, and with hope came the first cracks in Grace's power. The household had changed. Susan's prayers and fasting had built a spiritual shield around her family, though the tension was still thick. David felt restless and confused. The pull he had felt toward Grace was fading, replaced by guilt, shame, and clarity. One evening, David stayed in the living room longer than usual, thinking. He replayed the past weeks in his mind, the laughter, the stolen glances, the strange excitement he had felt around Grace. Suddenly, it all seemed wrong. He saw her manipulations clearly for the first time. Every accidental touch, every whispered compliment, every lingering smile, it had been planned. David's chest tightened. "What have I done?" he whispered, covering his face with his hands. His heart ached as he thought of Susan, of the children, and the love he had almost lost. Grace, confident moments before, noticed the change in him. She leaned closer, whispering softly, "David, don't you feel something special between us?" David shook his head violently. "No. This isn't right. You've been controlling me," he shouted, his voice trembling with anger and fear. Grace's smile faltered. She realized the spell was breaking. The power she had felt over David was disappearing. Panic crept into her expression. She tried to manipulate him further, but it was too late. The spiritual shield Susan had built with prayer and fasting had protected her family. Meanwhile, Susan had been watching from the doorway, kneeling silently in prayer. She saw David confront Grace and felt a wave of relief. She whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Open his eyes completely. Protect my family." David's guilt was overwhelming. He sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Lord, forgive me. I've been blind. I almost lost my family. Please, help me make things right," he cried. The children, hearing the commotion, ran to the living room. They saw their father on his knees, tears on his face, and Grace standing frozen. The little girl ran to hug him. "Daddy, is everything okay?" she asked softly. David scooped them into his arms. "Yes, my loves. Daddy was wrong, but God is helping me now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Grace realized that her plan had failed. The family's love, fortified by prayer and faith, was stronger than her charms. Fear and frustration filled her eyes. She turned and fled the house, powerless to harm them further. Susan approached David, her eyes filled with tears. "God has answered our prayers," she whispered. She hugged him tightly, and for the first time in weeks, the warmth of love returned. David held her, feeling the weight of his mistakes and the blessing of forgiveness. "I see everything now, Susan. I almost lost us, but your prayers saved our family," he said, his voice choked with emotion. The children laughed, hugging both parents. The house, once heavy with tension and fear, now carried a sense of peace and love. The darkness that grace had brought was gone, replaced by warmth, forgiveness, and faith. The morning sun shone through the windows, filling the house with warmth. For the first time in weeks, Susan felt a lightness in her heart. The tension that had hung over her home had lifted. Grace was gone, and David was fully aware of the mistake he had almost made. David approached Susan carefully, his eyes filled with tears. "Susan. I am so sorry," he whispered. "I was blind. I almost destroyed the best thing in my life. Thank you for your prayers, your faith, and your love. God has opened my eyes, and I want to make things right." Susan hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "God has answered our prayers, David. He saved our family. We are together again," she said softly. The children ran to David, clinging to him with joy. "Daddy," they shouted. "We missed you." David held them close. "I missed you too, my loves. I will never let anything come between us again," he promised. His voice was firm and full of emotion. The family spent the day together. They laughed, played, and shared meals like they used to before Grace arrived. The little moments, the warmth of love, the small acts of care, everything that had been missing came rushing back. Susan reflected on the ordeal. She realized that not every battle is visible. Some battles are spiritual, fought in prayer, faith, and perseverance. She had been weary and fearful, but she had not given up. Her steadfast faith had protected her home. David also reflected on his actions. He had been manipulated, bewitched, but he had also been careless with his heart. He understood the value of vigilance, faith, and love. He vowed never to take his family for granted again. The children, sensing the restored harmony, laughed and played, filling the house with joy once more. They hugged their mother and father tightly, understanding that love and faith had saved them. Susan and David knelt together that night, holding hands and praying. "Lord, thank you for protecting our family, for showing us the truth, and for restoring our home. Please continue to guide us and keep us strong," Susan whispered. David added, "Thank you, Lord, for opening my eyes, forgiving me, and giving me a second chance with my family. Help me to always be a good husband and father." The house, once heavy with fear, now radiated peace, love, and faith. The darkness that grace had brought had vanished. The family had learned powerful lessons about prayer, vigilance, and trust. Susan looked at David and smiled. Not every enemy comes with a sword. Some hide behind smiles and kind words. But faith, prayer, and love can defeat them all, she said softly. David hugged her tightly. "I will never forget that. Our family is precious, and we will protect it together," he said, his voice full of determination. "Remember, not every smile is innocent. Guard your home, trust God, and pray for strength." If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more life-changing stories, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to protect your family from hidden dangers. Thank you so much for watching.